It was an interesting one
so.
for Lewis Hamilton to go around the outside, although he has taken full responsibility, which is quite nice.
I will.
Lewis,
I will quote his tweet.
Up.
I've watched the replay and it was 100% my fault, and I take full responsibility. Apologies to my team and to George. So accountability for sure. I mean, yeah, I think on the initial eye test, it was hard to judge from the camera angle, but once you saw the onboards, I mean, there was nothing more Russell could have done. Hamilton had tarmac to his left. And it kind of, again, similar to that incident with him and Alonso in Spa, where he's overtaken on the outside and just kind of makes contact when there is still space to the left. So, yeah, not great from Lewis. Disappointing because a big opportunity for him to close that gap to Checo as well.
Yeah.
I like to think with Lewis putting his hands up, this should, and George getting a decent result, P4 in the end, this shouldn't. But this is happening quite a bit this year between the two of them. And I don't know. I think Toto giving these two both a 2-year contract, James, that's a bit...
They kind of sort of maybe need to establish who is the number one in the team, because if they get involved in a title fight with another team, they will take...
Surely they can't do that. Surely that ship sailed now.
Unfortunately, they've done that, and they're going to struggle because they're going to take points off each other. Yeah. They will at some point hit each other if they're in a title fight. I mean, they already have, and I know the ramifications here are smaller because somehow they still managed to outscore Ferrari. They were presented with an open goal, missed it, and still got 2 more points than Ferrari. So they're fortunate that their gap to McLaren is sufficient that they probably in the last 5 races will be okay.
Yeah.
But they had an open goal today, starting on the second and third, and they did kind of miss it. And it's the second weekend in a row that those two have they got perilously close to touching each other in Japan, and here they've paid the ultimate price with one car in the gravel trap at the exit of turn 1. So they're going to have some big talks, because they've got to keep a lid on this just for the team's sake more than anything. That second in the constructors is so valuable. There's a huge amount of cash riding on it, and for them, their two drivers taking each other out is not what they need in this moment.
Yeah, I feel like the narrative that George was pitched when he arrived at Mercedes has changed completely, because there may have been a clear path of Lewis maybe making way for George to lead the team, but now that Lewis has actually extended, George is now thinking, well, what's my place in the team then? So throughout the entire year, George has been a man in a hurry, much like Charles at Ferrari. He's the man in a hurry to prove something. Lando to a lesser extent, but it's really George and Charles I find a lot in common. That they're trying to justify their position of being put on this pedestal. Mercedes are putting George as the future, or at least they were. And George is desperately in the races trying to go, look, I can think on the fly. Let me try this out. I just want to see if this will work. And the team just don't have quite that much confidence in him to actually pull it off. And most of the time, Mercedes, they're right that George's idea won't work.
Well, they were right in the sprint when he wanted to pit.
That's what I'm saying. That's the thing. That's the kicker, is that George's plans wouldn't work. So George is now scrabbling around trying to figure out, what's my definition here? What's my motivation? What am I supposed to do? Yeah. And you felt like actually in the sprint and the qualifying, he had calmed down. But now it's just a case of, not quite so sure about that.
Because this is a headache, lads.
Yeah, it is.
They've signed up for 2 more years of this, Mercedes. And, I've said this before, I feel like if Mercedes get the car to fight at the front, they are surely going to feel obliged, a sense of obligation on themselves, given what happened in 21, to give Lewis and prioritise and want Lewis to get that 8-4 title at Mercedes, because that will reflect, if Lewis does get 8, he will be then statistically, in terms of the most titles of all time, ahead of Schumacher, and that will reflect positively on Mercedes. They've given George this kind of, I mean, we saw, last year he outscored Lewis, and there was a lot of potential factors for that, but the whole time he's been close to Lewis. They're qualifying head-to-heads. They're one of the closest pairings. I don't know how they go forward from, because George is clearly incredible talent, and when you look at how old Lewis is and how much longer his career is going to be, and, age is just a number, yes, but Lewis will eventually retire. George has got years left in the tank. But then they've given George this open, but then Lewis still wants to stay and win an 8-4 title, and he believes in Mercedes, and he wants that 8-4 title. Others, what's the point? That's the only reason Lewis is here, is to win an 8-4 title. He's done everything else. So, how do Mercedes move forward? JB, if you're in charge, what do you do if you're Toto Wolff? what do you do? I don't
Problem
know.
It's continually ramping. I feel like George Russell had a nice season last season where just being consistent, especially where Lewis was playing around with the setup quite a lot of that Mercedes, he obviously finished ahead of him in the standings. Now this season, it's almost been a little bit of a reality check for George Russell.
Yes.
Like he's made that mistake in Canada, which is the one that I come back to, where he was just all on his own and he hit the wall. And then, Singapore was another one where it was like a lot of people were saying after that race, could Lewis have won it if George wasn't in the way with Lando Norris and Carlos Sainz just in front of Hamilton? Like I'd have backed Hamilton more than Russell to get past those two, whether or not he'd have been able to do it. And it also does feel like just in the last few races, George has had the benefit of better qualifying. Hamilton said himself recently that his qualifying needs to get better, but Hamilton still has the edge in terms of race pace. So what they're having at the moment is, even though George starts slightly ahead, Hamilton's right there in the race. And it almost gets to the point where, as you said, they back themselves into a corner where they can't really be like, George, Hamilton's the number one driver. You could let him by, please. Like we see it with Sergio Perez all the time. Like Verstappen, whenever he's anywhere near him, Sergio, move out of the way. Like they can't really say that to George.
It's a problem because George is quick enough.
And that's the
to
point.
hang with Lewis.
Like, with Mercedes now, the 2-year contract, there's nothing they can do.
No.
I don't think they can convince George that if he's right there with Lewis Hamilton, he has to give way to him. And then in no imagination are they ever going to convince Lewis Hamilton to move out of the way for George Russell.
No,
So it's
come
just,
on.
they've got themselves in this situation. There's nothing they can really do. And it's just going to get to the point where if they are on the same piece of track, they're going to fight each other.
Yeah.
I think they're going to have to suck it up and just be like, look, we've made the decision to pick 2 of the 5 strongest drivers on the grid. I mean, it doesn't matter how you rank them. 2 of the 6, say, if you include, say, others being Verstappen, Leclerc, Alonso, and Norris. We've got 2 of the 6 best drivers on the grid, both in our cars. We expect the maximum. And if at some point it boils over, we're going to have to accept it, knowing that the points that they will have made up being, George being that much better than, say, who they had before in Bottas. That percentage over the course of the season will mean that if we do have a blowout, we'll still be getting more points than we would have with a lesser driver or with a better team player or a number 1 and a number 2 in that scenario. So they're going to have to try and balance it some way.
They've made their bed.
Exactly, and now they're going to have to lie in it. And I think they have to suck it up because that's exactly what they've done for 2 more years. And at some point, if they get the car that requires them to the championship, these two are going to take points off each other.
I think there was maybe a little bit of an assumption from Mercedes, especially when they got Russell into that Williams seat. And obviously he was contracted at Williams for 3 years. I think they expected Hamilton to probably have those 8 titles. I don't know if
possibly.
they saw 2021 coming in the way that it did. And therefore, in their minds, they probably thought Hamilton will have 8. Maybe he'll do 1 more year. And then he'll move across. Whereas because Hamilton didn't win that 8th title, kind of got the race that he wanted, almost like with Verstappen right now. Verstappen talks about the fact that he isn't really that enthusiastic about Formula One because it's too easy to an extent. Hamilton kind of had the same thing where if he'd have won that 8th title, if it had been super easy, he walked to an 8th title, would he have been that enthusiastic about staying around for like that much longer? No. Whereas now he's had a title battle with Verstappen. He knows the Mercedes car can get maybe back towards that Red Bull. He's got a little bit of a challenge back again. And it's kind of reinvigorated Hamilton to be like, I'm going to stay for another couple of years. I'm going to see what this Mercedes can do.